Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. In business, we spend so much time optimizing channels, but do we really spend enough time optimizing ourselves? But what do you need in order to do that? A therapist to look back or a coach to look forward? And are you willing to let go of good in order to go after great? Erika Gerdes is an authenticity advocate, executive leadership coach, speaker, writer, and former Google business executive. And on this episode, we'll discuss authenticity, vulnerability, happiness, coaching versus therapy, the art of undoing, being at the crossroads for change, Joseph Campbell, Hamlet, Liar Liar, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an authenticity advocate with an authentic shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Erika, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us a little bit about your background story and your career to date.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
thrilled to be here. My background story, I am what I consider to be a lifelong overachieving, insecure people pleaser.
Yeah.
And the way that manifested itself for me is that I basically chased what I call gold stars for the majority of my life and was very proud of all of the ones that I had collected. And that included graduate degrees, 4.0 GPAs, all kinds of recognition and accomplishment. And I worked at Google for 12 years. And about 7 years ago, I had an experience that really woke me up and made me realize that I wasn't happy in the life that I had built for myself. And the specific inciting event was that my second daughter, when she was born with a tumor on her spinal cord. And that was so far off any plan that I had ever anticipated for my life, that while I was in the hospital with her as she recovered from spinal neurosurgery as a 3-month old, and she is okay now, although we will have a lifetime of additional surgeries. But while I was there with her, I sat in the hospital so mad at God, at my life, at the world, at everything that was happening and how unfair it was. And in that moment, it made me realize that I was waiting for my life to start. I was waiting for the time when everything that I had done, all of the work that I had put into building this life was going to finally pay off, and I was going to finally feel happy and fulfilled and satisfied. And this is after being married, living in the suburbs, having a beautiful home, working at Google, having these 2 little kids, all of the things I thought I was supposed to want, and still I didn't feel happy. And from that moment forward, I started specifically looking at all parts of my life and seeing what actually led me to feel happy and what things I was doing because I thought they looked good and were just about collecting gold stars. And because of that, that thought that changed my life while I was in the hospital, it led me to ultimately leave my job, my marriage. I first got divorced, and then I really discovered who I was and what I wanted, and that made me realize that it was time for me to make a change in my career, which was probably harder than leaving my marriage, to be honest, leaving Google. But I did it because I knew that I wanted to make a bigger impact in the world and really use my gifts in order to serve the greatest good. And I didn't feel that that was happening at Google. So I left not because I didn't love Google, I absolutely did, but because there was something I felt I couldn't not go do, and that was to serve in a greater capacity in the world. So that's what I do now. Last year, I left Google. While I was there, my last job was as a global business leader. I oversaw one of the largest global partnerships at Google. And I jumped off the cliff in early 2019 as a single mom with no financial support, did basically all the things that nobody does.
Sure.
And I started my own business as what I call an authenticity advocate. And it's really about authenticity, thought leadership. So I do it through coaching and speaking and writing and really sharing my story as a way to help inspire and motivate people to own theirs and share their own stories.
So it's a little bit of a midlife crisis. I mean, couldn't you have just gotten a sports car like every guy does, or something
Oh, I did
stupid
that.
like that? Did you?
No,
Okay.
I did do that. No, that was very much a part of it. So in 2000, I got divorced in 2016, and then 2017, that year was just completely upside down. I literally didn't know which end was up because my life just had completely, fallen apart from my intentional decision to get divorced. In 2017, I had what I called the year of Erika. And that was the year that I gave myself permission to say yes to what I wanted, where for my entire life, I'd always said no to myself because I was always doing the responsible thing. I was, you know, only spending money on the things that were responsible and the right thing to do. And finally I said, but what do I really want? What do I like? What do I love? What do I enjoy? And when I did that, one of the first things that came to mind was I like speed. And so I actually allowed myself to go get a sports car. And so that was one of my proudest purchases, not because it was a fancy car. It was a, very used older car, but it brought me so much joy and I absolutely loved it.
What kind was it?
It was an Audi S5 black convertible.
Nice.
So it had about 240 horsepower convertible. It was great. My other car was a van. So it was
Oh, nice.
very,
Yeah.
very different.
So when you look back at your life, where do you tie the most of your angst back to? Was it everything? Because, I mean, your story's not unlike a lot of people, but when you look back on it now, was your marriage versus how much was Google versus how much was the tumor telling you to look at everything differently?
Because I believe that we are the creators of the lives that we live, I have to take full responsibility that it was all me. I created this. I built it. I became the person that I was in my marriage and then wasn't happy in it. And I was not really fully living into what I always knew I loved doing when I did the work at Google. I was very good at it and I really enjoyed it. And the thing that I always yearned to do more of was make a bigger impact and help people change their lives. And I tried in a lot of different ways to make that work inside of Google. And it couldn't get to the place where it felt like it really truly fit into the hole that was still in my life. So I think that there are a lot of things that really led up to my journey that I know you had a guest on recently who talked about kind of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Mine follows that exact same sort of mythological path of the inciting event, the going out into the world. I even have the guide that Joseph Campbell talks
Yeah.
about. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's really amazing when you start looking back over your life. I think that what you said, my life isn't that different. I mean, it's not like I had this that there was some huge epiphany in my life that was so different from something that everybody else has. And I think that's what really is important is that we're constantly in an opportunity to change. We're constantly at this crossroads in our lives where we can choose to hold on to good or what may look good, or let go of good and go after great without any guarantee that we're actually ever going to get there. And I took the road less traveled, and it's hard, and it is sometimes very painful. And I feel more rewarded and fulfilled and free and authentic and full and whole than I have ever felt in my entire life.
Yeah. Well, and Michael was the guest on episode 230. And knowing him, I mean, he did come from some dark places in his own life with what he was going through. He also remained married and had kids. And so a lot of times you see this with people with what they go through. And a lot of it seems to be just disrupting what they look at as their normal life. And they come out on the other side, and you're looking at it the same way he is. It just some of the stuff, some of the pieces didn't get rearranged the same way. So it's always fascinating to me just to look to see what people go through in that process when they come out of it to the place where you are now, which is in a much better place.
And I think you bring up a really, really good point that actually keeps people from ever making true change because it feels so overwhelming. I mean, most of us don't start changes thinking, well, I'm going to have to blow up my whole life and hope that it all works out on the other side. And what I really talk to people about now and try to set as an expectation is that change is, for the most part, all about what we do with our inner work, and the outer work, the stuff that we see on the outside, is usually the last to change. And it's to a certain extent much easier than the inner work that we have to go through in order
Oh
to
yeah.
get there. So it's absolutely possible that in another version of my life, I very easily could have stayed married or could have stayed at Google and still found a path to feeling the same way I feel here now. I just didn't go that route. And so, I definitely want to help people realize that change is never about the stuff on the outside. I mean, if most of us, I know the number of times I left jobs or cities or boyfriends or houses hoping that I would feel better when I got to that next thing. I can't even begin to count. I call it being on the future. It's like happiness is a future destination. And I was constantly on the highway chasing down happiness as quickly as I could. And it wasn't until I had gone through enough iterations of getting to that future destination of happiness and realizing that it was fleeting, that I was still going to have to get back on the road and keep going to the next thing, that I finally realized, oh, I can't keep looking on the outside. I have to look on the inside. And it just happened to be that for me, once I had done the inner work, then what I realized was in order to live in alignment, I have to not be married and I have to not work at Google.
Yeah. Well, I think your point, though, is spot on about just so happens in your case. What you're preaching to people to become authentic is not leave your marriage and leave your job, because for everybody to find that, as you said, it's dealing with an inside, not what's outside. So you talk a lot about the art of undoing. Tell us a little bit about what that means and unpack that story a little bit.
The term the art of undoing I developed right after I left Google because I thought, by the time I left Google, I had been thinking about it. I had had enough early life crises that I hadn't acted on that I knew I needed to be doing something different. I was just too scared to act on it. So by the time I left Google, this had been, years and years in the making. And I had already gotten divorced and gone through the year of Erika and all the other, inner transformation. So I thought when I left, I was going to be in such a good place and I'd already gone through all the inner work and was just ready to embrace this new authentic life. And then I jumped off the cliff, metaphorically speaking. And when I did, I was completely unprepared for how hard it was going to be. Not because of logistics, not because of the lack of money, but because when I left and I didn't have KPIs and goals to achieve and accomplish, I didn't know how to prove myself. I didn't know how to add value. I didn't know what to do with myself. And when I couldn't say that I worked at Google anymore, I didn't know how to impress people. And that was really hard for me to admit to myself that I didn't realize just how much of my identity had been tied up in what I did. And so I started practicing. I was joking around with a lot of people early on and saying, I'm practicing the art of undoing. And what I meant by that was I was literally undoing, not doing things, because I found that I was just doing a lot of stuff, trying to keep myself busy just to demonstrate my value or impress people or show that I had it all together when really I didn't. And it was just me being super insecure. And as I sat in that place of embracing the art of undoing, it started to take on so many more meanings for me, so many more layers. And what I realized was that I'd been practicing this art of undoing for years. And it wasn't just about learning how to be versus do, it was also about systematically removing layers that were not me so that I could come to the heart of who I was. And what was keeping me from getting to some of those deeper layers was that there was such a part of my identity that was wrapped up in what I did. And I couldn't see that until I no longer was doing that and didn't have that crutch anymore. And so over the course of the last year and a half, I have really started to hone in on how I can help other people to go through this journey of the inner work, whether it includes changes to how you show up in the work that you do, or how you show up in your marriage, or just in your daily life, or it includes things like jumping off the cliff like I did, or changing careers entirely. But it really is about getting to a deeper level of who you are underneath the identities that we hold so dear to ourselves that are actually keeping us stuck, because so many of those are based on fear. And until we are able to undo the power of the fear stories that do keep us stuck, it's really, really difficult for the changes that we want to make to stick.
One of the things you said that I think is really interesting, and I find this with people who sort of unpack a lot of stuff that they go through when they have jobs working for well-known brands, like you said, Google, for example. You take the Google logo off of other people that have worked there, and then they look at themselves in the mirror and it's not the same to the rest of the world. And I think about this a lot of times with speakers. I used to get requests of this all the time to speak places when I had a big name brand logo behind me, and I find a lot of people struggle with it, with finding their own identity when they come out of big corporations or even little corporations where they're at the top, to be
Hmm.
just a continuous struggle all the time with people trying to figure out what they have inside versus what they think the world sees of them once they attach some sort of brand logo to them. And it's not necessarily a question about speakers or any other massive thing, but it's so easy to find insecurities in so many people when they pull themselves away from the packaging that they have themselves wrapped up in this case, sort of corporate logos and positions they're in.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I'll say, I'll own it and say, it frustrates me a lot about the industry I'm in, this so quote unquote self-help industry, if you want to call it that, is that it's so focused on tips and tricks, and it's because it's easy for us to hold on to those. It's easier for us to say, okay, I'm going to go follow this step and
Yeah,
make a
we're going to talk
change.
about that on the back half of the show.
Yeah, okay, good. Well,
Yeah.
so one of the challenges though is that without getting to the heart of the stuff that's keeping us stuck, the changes won't stick. And the stuff that keeps us stuck is almost always related to our identity. We protect our identity so much, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. But when our identity is tied to the roles that we play and the responsibilities that we have, rather than who we are, just simply doing those things, it becomes almost impossible to move us out of the comfort zone of that identity without there being some struggle associated with it. And that's true, no matter if you're retiring, if you're changing careers, if you're changing from a marriage to not being married or vice versa, whatever label you call yourself, you are very likely attaching some sort of a deeper identity to it that is going to make it incredibly difficult when you try to move beyond that. And so what I really work on is helping people identify who they are beyond what they do. So what are their values? What do they hold as important? What are their beliefs? And then also, what are those, I call them anchors or fear stories. What are those things that are held deep below the surface that are keeping us from being able to move forward in the changes that we want to make? Because until we can recognize what those things are, we are always going to be held back and weighed down.
Yeah, and I don't want to make fun of any one group. I mean, you could go after millennials easily because it seems like so much of this holds them back today. You could take just as many baby boomers, which have a higher suicide rate and a lot of unhappiness that gets, that manifests itself over their lifetime, and then they come to this. But you see this just as often with kids now today and how they're socially disconnected from a lot of the world. So who are the kind of people that you're coaching and counseling the most? What are the ones that you find tend to be your, for lack of a better phrase, best customers?
Uh, Honestly, the best people are the people who are willing to do the work, and really interested in going to that deeper layer. And so it's usually pretty easy for me to tell if somebody is still looking for surface level solutions, trying to find those quote unquote future destinations of happiness, or if they're willing to say, okay, maybe it's not out there, maybe it's in here, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the work I need to do inside. That's really the what I look for. The people that I tend to attract and that I work most often with are high achievers, very highly successful people who are very similar to me in that they have, been people pleasers or have collected gold stars and been very successful at it and gotten to a place in their lives where they realize I don't want to just be okay with okay anymore. I don't want to keep telling myself this is first world problems and I just need to get over it. They're sick of feeling like there's an empty void inside of themselves that they just need to ignore, and instead they're willing to look and ask themselves the hard questions of what is it that's truly missing in my life that I need to work on discovering and fulfilling.
So is it typically a C level executive, or what are the type of professions that they're generally in?
Well, I mean, any and all, I would say, I mean, I have clients at a lot of the biggest name companies. And I would say it tends to be from middle management all the way up to the executive level. But really, truly, I used to think, in part because of what you said early in our conversation of my story isn't that different. I used to think probably nobody was dealing with this stuff, and then I realized, oh no, everybody is dealing with this.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
this is part of the human condition, and we all need help with this. And I so to me, one of the most important gifts that I can give people by sharing my story and creating space is for other people to realize that they are not alone when they are thinking about these things. I remember when I was at Google, I attended a women's leadership call, and it was like a mentoring call. So there were probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 women on this call from all over the world, all different levels, from not entry level, but sort of junior all the way up to executives. And one woman was brave enough to say on the call something about, sometimes I feel like an imposter. And I could audibly hear the sighs of relief from all over the world on this call as other women thought, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, me too. And so one of the things that I do is I try to work with anybody who is willing to raise their hand and say, I'm struggling with this. And I also try to, again, help anybody to come to that realization that they're not the only ones. So in my speaking that I do, I tend to talk with large groups, of course, in intact teams. I do talk a lot with sales teams because that was what I did previously. So I know that world really well. And then certainly, again, I would say usually the people that are working with me one on one are middle and upper management looking to get more out of their lives from an impact perspective, not so much a financial perspective. But one of the things that we work on is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It really can be both. And we just spend so much of our time believing that we have to choose between success and fulfillment. And I absolutely don't believe that that's true.
So one of the things that also sort of drew me to you, other than the intro of the mutual friend, was something you talk about that obviously is a hot topic in business, but it's the authenticity impact. Tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about what you provide as far as that and how people leverage and use that, not only just in their life, but in the workplace as well.
Well, I say that you take yourself wherever you go. So
Sure.
we're using it everywhere, whether it's a workplace or outside of. And the authenticity impact for me really is my core fundamental belief. The reason that I do the work that I do is because I absolutely know that we are most impactful when we are most authentic, and that the world needs the unique impact that each of us can make. And the problem is, so many of us don't see it that way. We see that we will make more impact when we just fit ourselves into the box or carve off this one little area that we feel like is a liability, or we, overcompensate for this thing that we just know is our biggest weakness and we better not let anybody see it. Instead, when we can actually embrace who we are and see the gifts that we have to offer, they become not just our right to have, but truly our responsibility to share. And it is then that we can have greater impact in both our lives and in the world. And so I left Google because I joked that I no longer wanted to be a part of funding the projects that changed the world. I wanted to be part of changing the world. And that's the way that I do it, is really by helping people change their lives so that they can have greater impact and help change the world themselves.
How do you help business leaders, especially leverage using authenticity, though?
Oh my gosh. So this is one of I call myself an authenticity advocate. So this is absolutely what my favorite topic. The word authenticity is so cliched and overused. There are so many words that I use that I think that sometimes it's like nails on a chalkboard. And I think, oh my God, how did I get myself saying these words? I don't like them, but I don't know I haven't quite figured out how to make up my own words that other people will embrace yet. So I come up with the closest I can. The challenge with authenticity is you cannot teach authenticity. Authenticity is not something you learn. It's really about unlearning and undoing, which is why the authenticity impact is kind of the outcome of the art of undoing, because who we are is covered up by so many layers of the things that we do and the ways that we act and the compensations and the justifications and the defense mechanisms and all the other stuff that we are using to shield and protect ourselves. So when we become comfortable and trust ourselves enough to be vulnerable, to expose who we really truly are, that is when we start to have more impact. But that isn't the way most people think. And so there isn't a quick tip that I can say, hey, here's how to go
Yeah.
be authentic. It's a practice. And to your question about organizations, you're absolutely right that authenticity becomes stronger in a team, but it does have to start. It often has to start with one person. Obviously, the goal is that it comes from a leader. In my experience, both at Google and in the work that I teach now, psychological safety is one of the most critical factors for creating a space for authenticity, for practicing authenticity, because we need to feel comfortable that we are in a safe environment to expose ourselves. If we constantly feel from our environment that we are at risk or in danger of being fired or demoted or rejected or any number of things that become real risks for us, we're very, very unlikely to be able to undo some of those layers or actually expose ourselves. So psychological safety and creating that space, container for people, is really the best place to start. And then from there, it's about truly embracing the differences within teams to be able to practice authenticity, because again, there's no one right way to be authentic. The only way to do it is to practice being who you truly are.
For a lot of people, they would absolutely love the opportunity to go tell their boss they're a complete jerk, and they become, they release that,
But that's
authenticity of
not being
really who they are.
authentic.
Well,
But
it
that's
could
not being
be.
authentic. That's still being defensive. Authenticity, that I'm so glad you said that, because if I go and say, you are being a jerk, then that may be my feeling, but that's not me being authentic. Me being vulnerable and authentic is saying, I am feeling hurt. I am feeling rejected, or whatever it might be that's actually true. But so much of the time, and I'm so glad you said this, so much of the time we hear of people, well, I'm just being authentic, so I'm going to go do this. But that's really insecurity in confident clothing or in authentic clothing. It's like wolf in sheep's clothing, sort of. Most of that is still very much defense mechanisms that are shielding and hiding who we truly are. If we're willing to be vulnerable enough to expose who we are, then we don't need the defense mechanisms of blaming other people. Because as leaders, and I truly believe that we are all leaders, no matter if you're leading your own life or you're leading a team or a company or a or a country, we must take responsibility for the actions that we take and how we feel and the feelings that we have. And so if I take responsibility for the fact that this person did something that hurt me, then the only way for me to be authentic is to own how I feel and how it creates an impact in me.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm trying to say, and I butchered it before, is that if I really want to tell the person what I truly believe about a product or a campaign or
Yeah.
something going on in this department or that department, if you're wanting to be truthful to yourself, you're going to want to say that and say that out loud because that's who you are. Some people call it leadership. Other people call it, Don Quixote running into a wall or two into a windmill, and that not working either. But people put on whatever that defense mechanism is, and maybe the manner that they tell it determines how sincere, secure, insecure they are with it. But I do think that a lot of times being authentic may mean just speaking what you truly believe and truly feel. And that's not, it's done in a professional way, but a lot of people mask that because they're
Hmm.
afraid. And that's the problem I have, that so often then it becomes fear leading
Right.
them, not necessarily authenticity, and
Right.
they start masking
Exactly.
over layers. So
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to get underneath what do we mean by authenticity, because so much of the time we call it authenticity and it's still fear. It's still insecurity that is masquerading as authenticity, and that is not authenticity. Authenticity is about vulnerability and our willingness to own our behavior and our impact. And so I'll give you very real example from my time at Google. I, for most of my career at Google, did not. I considered one of my greatest liabilities was that I was emotional. And I mean, my kids make fun of me now all the time because I cry at like every movie. But certainly I was not crying in meetings at work, but I always felt like there was a line and I needed to be super professional. And so I could only show certain parts of myself at work. And, if I showed this more emotional side of me, that would be absolutely detrimental to my credibility and my relationships and the work that I was doing. And when I got divorced, I stopped having the energy to hide that anymore. And it just became too overwhelming. And so I actually, still very professionally, I mean, it was not like I was still crying in meetings, but I was being more myself and I was exposing what was going on in my true life and true self. And in doing so, in sharing more about who I was and letting people in, it actually deepened all of my relationships. And it led me to creating some of the certainly the strongest relationships I'd ever had, and some of the most successful relationships in the national sales team at Google. And to the point where I had like contractor badges at multiple clients' offices. I was considered an extension of the clients' teams. I was presenting at internal team offsites and going on trips with them. I had literally become an extension of these clients' teams because using the emotion that I no longer saw as a liability, but instead a gift, I was creating deeper relationships and greater trust. You don't let people into your offices as a client or like a basically an employee unless you feel you can trust them. And because of me being authentic and create and having this emotional relationship with them, I actually created deeper trust with them, that they felt super comfortable letting me come into their offices. And it led to me having I was one of the top performers globally. And me being this same person that I am now, minus a few bumps and bruises from my jump off the cliff. I was leading a global partnership that was well over $100 million. So authenticity absolutely does work, and it really does create greater impact. And it has to be real authenticity, not fear masking as authenticity.
Majority of the people that come to you today, are they men or women? And I know what I assume. I assume it's women, but I'd love to be completely wrong and would love for you to tell me.
I would love for you to be completely wrong too, but you're not.
Why do you
Um,
think that is in today's world?
well,
We've already got, with what we're having to deal with today, we have social unrest because of the things that happened with the police brutality and racism that been the conversation for the last several weeks. We're in an election year. We've had a coronavirus pandemic. We've got murder hornets. I mean, that's for funsies. And it just seems like a lot of the people dealing with this, I deal with things in a different way, and I see a lot of the people just dealing with anxiety at a different level, and they're sort of passively aggressively comes out in a lot of how they interact with people in the workplace. And that's why, although I laugh at some people that need life coaches, I completely get it, because if it'll help anybody, it's worth it.
I don't. Well, I know why I assume that
And
there are
I'm
more
not
women
laughing
coming.
at your profession, by the way.
Yet, no, I didn't think you were. I wasn't taking it that way. Um, I don't know why it's more women. I really believed it was going to be almost all women, and then I started being surprised at how many men were interacting with me on social media and coming to me to talk, if not to start actually doing some coaching together. I do have a number of men clients as well, though, and to a certain extent, I think my story resonates more with women.
Oh, sure.
I I also resonate more with women in terms of, I mean, I grew up, my parents are divorced. I grew up being raised mostly by my mom. I'm not married. I'm raising two little girls. So it's sort of what I know. But at the same time, I want to help anybody. And it's interesting, despite the fact that all those things are true that I just mentioned, one of the topics that I'm most passionate about is actually helping men become more vulnerable as well, because I saw the effect it had on my dad and on my ex-husband, and I see it all over the place. And I really, really believe that it's so important for us to create a space for men to have permission to be vulnerable and not have to show up in these roles that we have assigned them to as a society. And I think that there is some dangerous rhetoric that's happening in our society, not just right now, but over the last several years related to Me Too and all that. I am certainly not um, minimizing the importance of these movements, but I absolutely believe that when we try to own women being empowered, we need at the same time to empower men to show more vulnerability and emotion. Because if we do not do that, then we create a deeper chasm between the genders rather than bringing us closer together in integration.
I get the value of what you do. I'm bothered often by surprised, if you will, by the number of people who need that help. That to me is just very interesting.
That need the help of coaching.
That need the help of something, whether you call it coaching or even going to see your mom, to see a therapist. It's amazing to me how many people are really masking this today, and how much,
Well,
and that's why half the marriages are end up in divorce or something
but
else. You know.
yeah, or something else. Well, I think what surprises me more, it's interesting that you're surprised by the number of people who need it. I'm surprised by the number of people who don't go for some additional help. I've never, I've been through therapy a number of times in my life, but I had never even considered coaching until I actually went into coaching training, because I do things very backwards most of the time. And what I have come to realize is that whether it's coaching or it's therapy or it's any number of things, we so often have no idea what is actually inside of our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And because most of us are not in a practice of journaling or some other way to sort of I call it taking the trash out that's inside of our heads, we have no idea what's happening until we start saying it out loud. And I'm sure most people, I know certainly me, there are times where I absolutely believe something to be true. And then I'll say it out loud and I think, what? That's silly. Why in the world would I believe that?
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't until we go through that process of reflecting more objectively on the stuff that's happening inside that we start to kind of see the holes in the logic of it. And so that's what I think coaching and therapy and so many of these other avenues do, is really help us become so much more aware of the stuff that we're unaware of. And again, going back to the anchor that I talked about, the stuff that is subconscious or unconscious for us, that causes us to react in very patterned ways, that's the stuff that is holding us in place and keeping us stuck. And it isn't until we can bring awareness to that stuff and bring it to the surface, which so often requires somebody else helping us with that mining process, that we actually move into a place of being able to be much more intentional.
Your mom and dad are both psychotherapists, right?
I would be so crazy if that were true.
But they're
I'm thankfully
doctors.
only half crazy. My father is a radiologist and my mother is a psychologist.
Okay, so
Yes.
your mother is a psychologist. What does she think
Yes.
of what you do as a life coach versus what she does as a psychologist?
Oh, this is a tough one. So both of my parents have very interesting thoughts about it. And it took me a very long time to be okay with how they feel and just doing my own thing anyway, despite the fact that I'm nearing 40 years old. I still care what my parents think. So my father, when I left Google, told me that he cried a tear because he didn't know what he was going to brag to people about anymore. And he
Oh.
knew that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And he hoped that I wasn't burning any bridges because I would absolutely need to go back. The good news is I didn't burn any bridges and I also don't need to go back, but I'm sure I would be welcomed with open arms if I wanted to. But what I did see, what it exposed me to is that it is the fear veil that he used. He didn't believe that I could go make it doing this different thing. And I needed to stay on this very linear path that I was on. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be successful. He's been thrilled with the success I've had. My mom,
Did he shed a
uh,
tear when you told him you were going to leave your husband?
no, he
Odd. Unless your husband had been named Google.
He did not shed a tear that at that time. No, he did not. The only, the way I grew up, the story about who I needed to be was that I needed to be successful and I needed to be good at what I did. And as long as I was doing prestigious, successful things and was
Sure.
smart and attractive and popular, then I was worthy. And so if I wasn't doing those things, then I was less worthy. And so that became the story I told myself. And that's how I ended up, collecting gold stars and all the other stuff. But I have to take ownership because, yes, that's how I was raised. And I kept that story going until the point when I brought awareness to it and was able to take the weight out from underneath it. My mom, when I told her what I was doing, she was very disapproving of it. And quite frankly, I understand. I mean, she has a doctorate in psychology. There are a lot of people who do the kind of work that I do or call themselves coaches with little to no training who are working on really deep issues. And I, it is incredibly important to me. It is in my bones to do service to people and never to harm somebody. And so, and that's, how I was raised as well, do no harm. And so for most of us, and so I have had to be very, 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 very conscious that I hold myself back a little bit because I'm afraid I might hurt somebody, totally by accident. And so I overcompensate by getting more training or degrees or, waiting until I feel I'm perfect at something to be willing to go out with it. But I very much guide the work that I do on coaching rather than therapy, despite the fact that I have a lot of experience with therapy. I am not a trained psychotherapist, so I never ever want to go into that place of trying to heal somebody's deep trauma because I think that's the work of a doctor.
Well, and I think you said you look forward, they look back.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
I absolutely see the two can work in concert. That therapy is really about healing backwards, and coaching together can be used with movement forward, so that we're taking where we are in the present moment and looking to the future.
What is the bar, the level that someone should expect if they come to interact with you as a life coach? Because if you just think of the metaphor of coach, the coach is calling a play and he's trying to move the ball down the field to get to the end zone or the goal line. What is the goal line that someone should have if they engage with a life coach like you?
Most people come to me with one of two questions or one of two admissions. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. And that surprised me a lot because I thought I was the only one that had those questions. But it's become very clear that those are very, very common questions for people. And so what I always say is that I help work with people to gain more confidence and clarity about who they are and what they want so that they can show up with more impact in the world. And so depending on the amount of time that I'm working with somebody, I absolutely work on helping them identify what are those anchors that are keeping them stuck, and what is true about who they are beyond the things that they do. Because again, bringing awareness to all of that stuff helps us move into a life of much more intention and impact. And so the goal line, I mean, I've had clients who by the time they've left their or finished our coaching have decided that they're actually exactly where they want to be and they feel really good about it. I've also had clients who by the time they're done with coaching have decided that they need to themselves blow up their own lives and have left major jobs or taken major career pivots, um, anything in between. But I've never had a client that has not achieved whatever the goal is that they set out for themselves, because again, I'm an overachiever and I work with overachievers. So
Sure.
I have high expectations for myself and what I can deliver, but the way that I work with clients is very much in a co-creation standpoint. Like I, they're not driving the agenda. I'm not driving the agenda. We're working together to create a space for learning and growth moving forward. But one of the things that I think is most important is that we don't need to spend a lot of extra time layering on additional stuff to learn from. Our lives are our playgrounds and our learning our classrooms, so we can learn in the experiences that we are in as long as we are able to look at them from the lens of learning and growth as opposed to defensiveness and reactivity. So rather than layering on new stuff for people to do, it's really about looking at what they are doing from a different perspective.
Well, Erica, I asked this as a motivational shark. I asked this question of all my guests. What is your
Okay.
favorite kind of shark and why?
Nurse shark, because it's the only one I've swam with.
Okay. Yeah, some big catfish basically. Well, Erica, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Absolutely.
All right, number 1. You're a suburban Chicago gal, so you got the kids in the car spending a day in Chicago. The Shed Aquarium or John Hancock Tower?
Shed aquarium.
Okay. Number 2, Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet?
Hamlet.
Why so?
That's the one with the ghost, right?
It is, but Hamlet's
Okay.
also Hamlet's the one where he said, "To thine own self be true," which is a nice little play off of your
That's true.
authenticity. So
That would have been
it's the
so much more
authentic.
apropos.
What's the more authentic play, if you will? So
And instead, I'm focused on where's the ghost?
exactly,
Which one's the haunting?
It's Ghostbusters. Yeah. So number 4, motivational coaches, authors, and famous people alike. Tony Robbins or Brian Tracy?
Tony Robbins.
Yeah, it would be hard pressed to find anybody better, female or male.
Yes.
But Brian Tracy's written like 500 books, so it's gives you something to read to get motivated. All right, number
True.
4. It's a good Jim Carrey question that really looks at authenticity as well and unpacks a lot of stuff. Liar, liar, or yes man?
Oh. Mm. Liar, liar.
Breakthrough saying yes instead of saying no, but yes man was great as well because it helped people break through.
Yes.
He's seen a few coaches I know on his own. So number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, they're both so good. Biscuits, but I don't know. That's a hard one.
Nice.
But I think biscuits.
Good. So Erica, where can people find more about you, your thought leadership in the space, how to become more authentic, unpack a lot of stuff that they pack it on themselves, but keep up with you, what you're doing, your thoughts, and more?
Your audience can go deeper with me at my website, which is erikagerdes.com. And you can also find me across all social media. On my website, I do offer a really good free download, which is a great activity to help people get more clarity and confidence almost immediately, as well as some great insights about how they should be shaping their time to create the life they want. And then I send out a weekly newsletter with a lot of inspiration and motivation for embracing your own authenticity.
Awesome. Well, I know I'm more motivated right now. So Erica, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delightful conversation.
So there was my conversation with Erika Gerdes, an authenticity advocate, executive leadership coach, speaker, writer, and former Google business executive. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with her. First, Erika's great. Her life story, while unique, isn't necessarily that different, but what I specifically love in her story is when she said, we're constantly in an opportunity to change. We're constantly at this crossroads in our lives where we can choose to hold on to good or what may look good, or let go of good and go after great without any guarantee that we're actually ever going to get there. That's so true. She had the epiphany when she started seeing her own child battling through cancer. That's a different road than most, one I hope that no parent has to endure, but it's what can feel so overwhelming to many. As she said, you don't have to blow up your whole life, but she recognized the need to change the inside, and the outer was the last part to change. So here's a comparison for you. I always enjoyed watching The Biggest Loser. I love the weight loss part of the show, but what I really appreciated was how they addressed the inside more than just what the exercise did on the outside. That's somewhat analogous to the many layers that people carry on themselves and get dragged down by, and that's what she's addressing with The Art of Undoing. Second, as she said, the word authenticity is so cliched and overused. I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard it used. She reminds us that you can't learn it. You can only undo it with all the layers that come into play, and we have more impact when we trust ourselves to be more vulnerable to who we are. For many people, fear often masquerades itself as authenticity. So what I would encourage you to start with is to pull that logo off of you, if you will, off of your identity, that packaging, and identify, as she said, with who you are rather than what you do. Start thinking about what the anchors are that are holding you down. Stop being afraid. Open up and be you. Third, oversimply speaking, therapy is for looking back and coaching is for looking forward. But if you're considering a coach, I would encourage you to figure out what the bar is for you. Start thinking about what you need to do before approaching someone like Erika. Most folks have no idea what's going on inside their heads. As somebody who finds their happy place in the water staring at sharks, I've talked about this on previous shows, and Erika would agree. If you need professional help, then seek a therapist, not a coach. Now, for somebody like me who swims with sharks as often as I do, you probably would agree that I need both a therapist and a coach, but that's a different story. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm going to go get some therapy now. Mine's just several meters down under the water, so join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.